Death comes for all of us. That's the one guarantee in life. But some people manage to meet their end in ways so absurd, they defy all logic. In today's episode, we're counting down the most ridiculous deaths ever recorded. And trust me, some of these are so mind-boggling, you'll wonder how they even happened.
It was May 18, 2015, when Amanda Rodriguez thought she had found the perfect solution to navigating her tech company's massive 50-acre campus in Austin, Texas. The 31-year-old CEO had just dropped $6,000 on a top-of-the-line Segway PTI-2, convinced it would revolutionize her daily routine and showcase her commitment to innovation. Amanda was notorious for being an early adopter of every new gadget that hit the market. To her, the Segway wasn't just transportation, it was a statement piece that screamed efficiency and forward-thinking leadership. However, her enthusiasm far exceeded her preparation. While the user manual clearly recommended 2 to 3 hours of practice time, Amanda had squeezed in barely 20 minutes the night before, dismissing it as unnecessary for someone of her intelligence. Her assistant had specifically warned her about the steep concrete staircase that led down to the campus fountain courtyard, but Amanda waved off the concern with typical confidence. She had an important investor meeting to attend, and nothing was going to slow her down, especially not some overly cautious safety advice. At exactly 2:15 that afternoon, Amanda was cruising across the campus at the Segway's maximum speed of 12.5 miles per hour. She was deep in an animated conference call through her Bluetooth headset, gesturing wildly with her hands as she discussed quarterly projections with potential investors. Her attention was completely divided between the high-stakes conversation and her surroundings. As she approached the top of the 15-step concrete staircase, Amanda was so engrossed in her phone call that she failed to notice where she was heading. The Segway, designed for smooth surfaces and gentle inclines, had no capability to handle stairs. Without engaging the steering mechanism to turn away, she rode straight toward the edge of the staircase. The front wheels rolled over the first step, immediately causing the platform to tilt forward at a dangerous 45-degree angle. Amanda was launched forward off the platform, but her right foot became trapped in the steering mechanism, creating a horrifying tether between her body and the 103-pound machine. She tumbled headfirst down the concrete steps, while still partially attached to the runaway Segway. Her skull struck the sharp concrete edge of the 7th step with tremendous force, causing a massive basilar skull fracture that would prove instantly fatal. The Segway continued its destructive descent, eventually landing directly on top of her, crushing her ribcage and rupturing her spleen with its considerable weight. The severe traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding caused Amanda to lose consciousness immediately. Despite the quick response from several employees who witnessed the accident and called 911, paramedics could only pronounce her dead at the scene. She had died within 2 minutes of the initial impact. The tragedy prompted immediate changes across the corporate campus. The company banned all personal transportation devices and installed safety barriers around every stairway. Amanda's death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of overconfidence and distraction, proving that even the most innovative technology can become deadly when combined with human error and poor judgment. It was July 8, 2019 in the city of Erzurum, Turkey. The streets buzzed with the usual summer life, cars honking, kids running in the shade, and people trying to stay cool under umbrellas and awnings. But far from the crowds, inside a quiet home, 24-year-old Zafer Kuzu was about to do something dangerous, something that would shock his community and end his life. Zafer had been in trouble. He'd gotten into a serious fight that left someone injured. Instead of going to prison, a judge gave him a second chance, community service. It wasn't fun, but it wasn't jail either. All he had to do was help out the city for a while, maybe clean streets, paint walls, or assist at local buildings. But Zafer didn't want to do any of that. He felt like it was too embarrassing, too tiring. He wanted out. Then an idea popped into his head. A bad idea. What if he could fake an accident? What if he could get hurt, just enough to be sent to the hospital, and skip the punishment completely? To Zafer, this seemed clever, but what came next would be anything but smart. He called up 2 of his friends, Arda, who was just 18, and Mello, a little older. These were kids who trusted Zafer, who probably didn't realize how serious things were about to get. Zafer told them his plan. He wanted to get shot, not with a toy, with a real shotgun. Arda and Mello were shocked. "You're kidding, right?" they probably asked. But Zafar was serious. He believed that if he could survive the blast, it would land him in the hospital, and he'd get out of community service. To protect himself, he strapped 2 big, puffy pillows to his back. They were regular household pillows, the kind you sleep on at night. He thought they'd cushion the blow. It wasn't armor. It wasn't tested. But Zafar had already made up his mind. They set it up in a quiet room, maybe in someone's home or backyard. No ambulance waiting, no doctor on call. Just 3 young men about to do something horribly wrong. Zafar stood with his back turned. He told Arda to aim carefully. Arda gripped the shotgun with shaky hands. His heart was probably racing. He took a breath, then pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The blast shook the room. Shotguns don't fire one single bullet. They fire dozens of tiny metal balls called pellets. And at close range, those pellets hit with full force, spreading out fast and wide. Zafar's pillows. They didn't stand a chance. The blast tore through the fabric, through the feathers, and straight into Zafar's back. He screamed, collapsed. Blood soaked through his clothes. Panic filled the room. Arda dropped the shotgun, shaking. Mello ran over to Zafar, yelling his name. But Zafar couldn't speak. He was in shock, struggling to breathe, losing blood fast. They didn't call an ambulance right away. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't want to get in trouble. But every second mattered, and time was running out. By the time help was finally called, it was too late. Zafar had already died. When emergency services arrived, the scene was chaotic. Zafar's lifeless body was on the ground. The shotgun was seized. Police arrested Arda on the spot. Mello was taken in for questioning. Zafar's body was sent to a forensic lab in Istanbul for a full autopsy. His wounds told the full story. Close-range blast, no protection, and 0 chance of survival. News spread quickly. A young man had lost his life in the most senseless way, trying to get out of community service. People were shocked, confused, and heartbroken. How could someone believe this was a good idea? Authorities later confirmed that the plan had no chance of working. The court never would have excused someone for a self-inflicted injury. Zafar's entire plan had been built on a lie, and it cost him everything. Now, instead of completing a simple punishment, Zafar was gone. Arda faced legal consequences for pulling the trigger. Mello's life was also changed forever. 3 lives, 1 reckless decision. But the story of Zafar Kuzu isn't the only case where a split-second decision turned into a life-altering tragedy. It was April 2014 in St. Petersburg, Russia. The night air was crisp and cold, the kind that makes your breath visible in small clouds. Most people were tucked away in their homes, but 17-year-old Zhenya Ignatieva saw the darkness as an opportunity. An amateur photographer with dreams bigger than her experience, Zhenya had recently purchased a new camera with money from her summer job. Tonight, she was hunting for the perfect shot, one that would capture not just an image, but the thrill of danger itself. The railway bridge in the Krasnogvardaysky district stood like a steel giant against the night sky. Rising 30 feet above the concrete below, it was exactly the kind of dramatic setting Zhenya was looking for. She imagined the train tracks fading into darkness, creating a striking image that would impress her friends and followers. What she didn't realize was that this search for the perfect photo would cost her everything. Zhenya wasn't alone that night. Her friend Oksana Zhanova, also 17, had come along, though she didn't share Zhenya's passion for risky photography. While Zhenya began climbing the towering structure, Oksana stayed firmly on the ground, watching with a mixture of admiration and concern as her friend ascended higher and higher. She was always looking for the most dramatic shots, Zhenya's grandmother Olga would later tell reporters, her voice breaking with grief. She thought the bridge would make the perfect backdrop. This wasn't Zhenya's first dangerous climb. Like many thrill-seekers her age, she was part of a growing trend where young people scaled tall structures, rooftops, cranes, bridges, to capture breathtaking photos. The danger didn't scare her, it only made the experience more exciting, the resulting images more impressive. When Zhenya reached the top of the bridge, she carefully positioned herself, trying to capture the perfect angle. The city lights twinkled in the distance as she balanced precariously on the metal structure. But as she moved to take the selfie, something went terribly wrong. Whether it was a sudden gust of wind, a misstep, or simply the perilous position she was in, Xenia lost her balance. In that heart-stopping moment, she realized she was falling. Instinctively, she reached out to grab something, anything, to stop her descent. Her hand caught a cable, but what should have been her salvation became her doom. The cable was live, carrying 1,500 volts of electricity through its metal core. The shock was immediate and devastating. The electricity surged through Xenia's body, causing her muscles to seize and her grip to loosen. She fell 30 feet to the concrete below, the impact fatal. But the electric shock may have already caused severe damage before she even hit the ground. Oksana, still at the bottom of the bridge, witnessed the entire horrific incident. She watched helplessly as her friend fell, then ran to Xenia's side, but it was too late. When emergency services arrived, alerted by a call about kids on the bridge, they found Oksana frozen in grief beside her friend's body. The police investigation revealed the tragic sequence of events. Xenia had died pursuing what psychologist Martin Voigt would later describe as the perfect shot, a phenomenon increasingly common in the age of social media, where young people take greater and greater risks to capture attention-grabbing images. She died doing what she loved, her grandmother said, finding little comfort in the thought. But she was so young. She had her whole life ahead of her. Xenia's death made headlines across Russia and beyond, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of extreme photography. Her story serves as a grim reminder of how quickly a moment of adventure can turn deadly, how the pursuit of the perfect selfie can lead to the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, Xenia Ignatieva's passion for photography, once a source of joy and creativity, led to her tragic and untimely death, another victim of the deadly selfie game. It was October 31st, 2024. Diwali night brought light and laughter to Bengaluru, India. Amidst the celebrations, however, one group of friends witnessed a tragic turn of events, an example of the dangers that could arise from reckless decisions. In the middle of the festivities was 32-year-old Shabarish, a construction worker known for his friendly nature. After a long day at work, he eagerly joined his friends to celebrate. Shabarish, who led a modest life, valued his time with loved ones. That night, encouraged by the energy of the festival and a few drinks, his friends presented him with a daring challenge. They offered him a new auto rickshaw if he would sit on a box of lit fireworks and let them explode beneath him. For Shabarish, who owned very little, this was a tempting offer. At around 9:30 in the evening, Shabarish accepted the dare, likely not fully aware of the risks. CCTV footage captured the event as the fireworks went off beneath him, leading to a powerful explosion that knocked him to the ground. His friends, stunned by what had happened, rushed him to Victoria Hospital, hoping he could recover. However, his injuries were severe, with extensive burns across his lower body. Shabarish fought for his life in the hospital over the next couple of days. His mother, Vijaya, first heard about the incident through one of Shabarish's friends, who vaguely mentioned he'd been hurt while handling fireworks. At the time, she had no idea about the real cause of his injuries as she watched her son suffer. On November 2nd, Shabarish succumbed to his injuries. The severe burns had taken an irreversible toll. As his family made arrangements for his funeral, they finally learned the truth of what had happened. CCTV footage revealed the role his friends played in pushing him toward the dare, and Vijaya was devastated to learn they had misled her initially, making her believe it was an accidental injury. Authorities quickly put together the details of the night. Deputy Commissioner of Police Lokesh Jagalasar reported that 6 friends who had encouraged Shabarish to perform the dangerous stunt were arrested and charged with culpable homicide. The tragic events resulted from a mix of alcohol, poor judgment, and peer pressure. What began as a daring challenge with the promise of an auto rickshaw ended in a tragic loss, deeply impacting Shabarish's family. The incident was captured on a CCTV camera installed at one of the buildings, Vijaya told a local newspaper. I was shocked to see the footage and realized that the youths had lied to me. According to Vijaya, Shabarish had gone to work as a construction worker and returned home for the Diwali celebration. I wish he had stayed away for a few more days, lamented the mother. At least, he would have still been alive. Shabarish's story is one among among many, as accidents involving fireworks frequently spike during Diwali in India. Although the season brings joy for many, it often leads to unfortunate incidents, sometimes with fatal outcomes. Shabarish's family now faces the painful aftermath of his loss. Vijaya initially trusted the young men who were with her son that night, believing their story about an accidental injury. Now she wishes her son had avoided the Diwali festivities altogether. This tragic dare turned a night of celebration into a heartbreaking event, showing how easily festivities can spiral into disaster when poor decisions are made under the influence of alcohol. For Shabarish, the promise of a new auto rickshaw and the possibility of a better life clouded his judgment, leading him to a fatal choice. It was a quiet Saturday evening on December 6, 2009. In the small town of Konotop, Ukraine, Vladimir Likonos, a 25-year-old chemistry student, sat at his computer in his home while his parents were nearby, enjoying a peaceful evening. From a young age, Vladimir had been fascinated by science, particularly math, physics, and chemistry. His passion led him to study at a regional branch of the Kiev Polytechnic Institute, one of Ukraine's most prestigious technical universities. Vladimir had a peculiar habit. He liked to chew gum with a twist. He would regularly dip his gum in citric acid to enhance and prolong its flavor. It was something he did so often that it had become second nature to him. His friends and classmates knew him as a quiet, level-headed young man who spent most of his free time experimenting with various chemicals and even making homemade firecrackers. That fateful night, as Vladimir sat at his computer, he reached for what he thought was his usual citric acid to dip his gum into. However, on his table were two containers, one with citric acid and another containing an explosive powder he had been working with for his studies. In the dim light, or perhaps out of habit, Vladimir made a devastating mistake. He dipped his gum into the wrong container. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the evening silence. The sound was so loud it echoed throughout the house. Vladimir's mother, hearing the blast, rushed to her son's room. What she found was a scene of horror. Vladimir lying on the floor, his face bloodied and disfigured. The explosion had blown off his entire jaw and most of the lower part of his face. When police arrived, they found approximately 3.5 ounces, 100 grams, of the explosive powder on Vladimir's work table. The substance looked remarkably similar to citric acid, but was actually an unidentified explosive compound. The scene was so disturbing that even seasoned police officers were shaken. Police spokeswoman Elvira Biganova later stated that it was an accident anyone could have made. A bomb squad was called to the scene, but the powder was deemed too volatile to move and had to be neutralized on site. Emergency services tried desperately to save Vladimir, but his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that the explosive powder was approximately 4 times more powerful than TNT. Vladimir had unknowingly created a bomb in his own mouth. Local experts would later confirm that the substance he had mistakenly used was indeed a highly volatile explosive, far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Vladimir's death sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Konotop. His friends remembered him as a brilliant student who was deeply passionate about his studies. He had just finished his semester exams and was home for the holidays. Irina Lisovskaya, deputy dean of the chemical engineering faculty, responded to the report saying, "He got an A in chemistry, but his grades in other subjects were average." Yes, Vladimir was not a poor student, but they don't teach how to make bombs at KPI. Vladimir Likonos' death serves as a stark reminder of how even the most mundane habits can turn deadly when combined with dangerous substances. His story, while shocking, highlights the importance of proper chemical safety and the devastating consequences that can occur from a single moment of confusion. Today, he rests in the Alexandrova Cemetery in Sumy, Ukraine, his grave marked by a single photograph, a reminder of a young man whose promising life was cut tragically short by one fatal mistake. It was November 28, 2004, and the winter twilight was settling like a heavy blanket over Kent, Washington. In a quiet community of mobile homes, where porch lights created islands of warmth in the gathering dark, Philip Quinn's trailer stood silent. The 24-year-old's parents, just a stone's throw away, were savoring the peace of a Sunday evening, unaware that their son's creative spirit was about to lead him down a devastating path. Philip had recently purchased a lava lamp, those iconic decorative items that gained popularity in the 1970s. These mesmerizing lamps typically contain a combination of mineral oil, paraffin wax, and carbon tetrachloride in a sealed glass container. When heated by a small bulb at the base, the mixture creates those hypnotic flowing patterns that have captivated people for decades. But Philip was impatient. Perhaps he wanted to see the colorful display more quickly, or maybe he thought the lamp wasn't warming up fast enough. Whatever his reasoning, he made a decision that would prove fatal. He placed the lava lamp directly on his hot stovetop. Why on earth he was heating a lava lamp on the stove, we don't know. Kent Police spokesman Paul Peterson would later say, his words capturing the bewilderment shared by investigators and family alike. What Philip didn't realize was that he had essentially created an improvised bomb. The sealed glass container, when heated too quickly, becomes a pressure vessel with no way to release the building force. The physics of what happened next are both simple and tragic. As the lamp heated on the stove, the pressure inside the glass container built rapidly. The heat caused the liquid inside to expand, but with nowhere for this expansion to go, the pressure continued to mount. The glass, designed to withstand the gentle heat of a small bulb, couldn't handle the intense heat of the stovetop. Without warning, the lamp exploded with devastating force. Shards of glass flew in all directions like shrapnel from a grenade. One piece, in a cruel twist of fate, struck Philip directly in the heart. Despite receiving this mortal wound, adrenaline allowed him to stumble into his bedroom, leaving a trail of blood that would later help investigators piece together his final moments. Hours later, Philip's parents made the horrifying discovery when they found their son's body. The scene was something out of a nightmare. The kitchen looked like a war zone with pieces of the exploded lamp scattered everywhere. The trail of blood led to their son's bedroom, where he had taken his final breaths. The medical examiner's report confirmed what seemed almost unbelievable. A single shard of glass from a lava lamp had pierced Philip's heart, causing his death. Police found no evidence of drug or alcohol use. This was simply a tragic accident born from an impatient moment and a lack of understanding about the physics of heated, sealed containers. Detective Mark Gustafson, who investigated the scene, noted that the force of the explosion was remarkable. The pressure built up to such an extent that when it finally gave way, it was like a small bomb going off, he explained. The glass had not just broken, it had exploded with enough force to turn a decorative item into a deadly weapon. Philip's death sent ripples through the community. Local news outlets covered the story, and safety experts used it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of misusing household items. The manufacturer of the lava lamp even issued a statement reminding consumers that their products should never be heated by any means other than the provided base. The tragedy left Philip's family grappling with questions that would never be answered. Why had he been so impatient? Did he not realize the danger? His father later remarked, "It's the kind of thing you never imagined could happen. One minute your child is there and the next they're gone because of a lava lamp." It was June 15th, 2024, when Bobby Henderson's procrastination finally caught up with him in the most horrific way imaginable. The 52-year-old insurance adjuster from Columbus, Ohio, had been putting off his yard work for 3 solid weeks, choosing golf games and work obligations over basic home maintenance. Bobby's homeowners association wasn't amused by his neglect. 2 warning letters had already arrived, threatening fines for his overgrown grass that violated neighborhood standards. That Saturday morning, his wife delivered an ultimatum that cut through his excuses like a blade. Either he mowed the lawn immediately, or she was hiring a professional service and billing him for the embarrassment. Rushing outside without his usual pre-mowing inspection, Bobby skipped breakfast entirely to get an early start before the summer heat became unbearable. His riding mower hadn't been serviced in 2 years, but he figured it would hold up for one more season. The thick morning dew coating the overgrown grass should have been his first warning sign, but Bobby was focused solely on finishing before his 10 o'clock tea time. At exactly 7 in the morning, Bobby fired up the mower and began cutting at maximum speed, determined to complete the job as quickly as possible. The wet, thick grass created clumpy piles that his neglected machine struggled to handle effectively. After 20 minutes of aggressive mowing, disaster struck when the soggy grass clippings became hopelessly tangled around the mower deck and discharge chute. The engine began bogging down under the strain, but instead of following basic safety protocol, Bobby made a fatal decision. He left the engine running and dismounted to clear the jam by hand, completely ignoring the fundamental rule of lawnmower operation. Always turn off the engine before performing any maintenance. As Bobby bent down to pull the tangled grass from underneath the 42-inch cutting deck, his foot slipped on the treacherous wet morning dew. He fell directly toward the spinning blades, which were still engaged and rotating at full deadly speed. The razor-sharp cutting blades struck his torso and arms with devastating force, causing massive lacerations and severing major blood vessels throughout his upper body. The simple failure to hit the off switch before clearing the jam cost Bobby everything. He bled out within minutes on his own front lawn, his life ending in the most preventable way possible. His wife discovered his mangled body 30 minutes later when she brought him his morning coffee, immediately calling 911 despite knowing it was far too late. The tragic incident prompted the neighborhood association to distribute comprehensive lawnmower safety pamphlets to every household, hoping to prevent another senseless death. Bobby's story became a grim reminder that basic safety protocols exist for good reason, and that no schedule is worth risking your life over a simple yard maintenance task.
It was January 27, 2018, at Nair Hospital in Mumbai, India. Rajesh Maru, a 32-year-old man from Lalbagh, had recently started a new job at a clothing shop in Parel. Today he wasn't at work, but was instead visiting the hospital to help his brother-in-law's mother, Laxmi Solanki, who needed an urgent MRI scan for suspected meningitis and pneumonia. What should have been a routine hospital visit would end in one of the most bizarre and preventable deaths you'll ever hear about. Rajesh was wheeling Laxmi on a stretcher with his brother-in-law Harish when they reached the MRI section. Anyone who's ever had an MRI knows the strict rules. No metal objects allowed. These machines use powerful magnets, thousands of times stronger than your refrigerator magnet, that can turn even small metal items into deadly projectiles. That's why there are multiple warning signs, metal detectors, and screening procedures. But here's where things went catastrophically wrong. As they approached the MRI room, ward boy Vithal Chavan asked Rajesh to carry an oxygen cylinder inside. Yes, you heard that right. A metal oxygen cylinder into a room with one of the most powerful magnets on Earth. When Rajesh hesitated, Chavan reassured him that this was routine work and claimed the machine was switched off. It was a fatal lie. The moment Rajesh stepped into the room with the cylinder, the MRI machine's powerful magnet activated like a giant invisible hand, yanking the metal cylinder with incredible force. Rajesh, still holding on to the cylinder, was violently pulled along with it. The force was so strong that his hand became trapped between the cylinder and the machine. Police would later explain how the magnetic waves sucked in the cylinder, dragging Maru along with it due to his proximity to the trolley. In the chaos that followed, the cylinder's flow meter broke, causing liquid oxygen to leak directly onto Rajesh's face. His brother-in-law and the ward boy desperately tried to free him, but the magnetic pull was too powerful. During the struggle, Rajesh's left index finger was severed. By the time they managed to pull him away from the machine, Rajesh had inhaled a fatal amount of liquid oxygen. He was rushed to the trauma center, but it was too late. By the time they reached the emergency ward, he was already dead. What makes this death so mind-bogglingly stupid is that it was entirely preventable. The MRI room had multiple warning signs about magnetic fields, prohibited items, and restricted entry. The ward boy, who should have known better, gave dangerously incorrect information. The doctor on duty failed to supervise properly, and the metal door to the MRI room, which should have been closed, was wide open. Rajesh's relatives later lamented that while the ward boy's permission to carry the oxygen cylinder was the initial mistake, the tragedy could have been prevented if the metal door had been properly secured. In the aftermath, 3 people were arrested: Dr. Saurabh Lanjakar, ward boy Vithal Chavan, and attendant Sunita Survey, all charged with causing death by negligence. The hospital's MRI machine was shut down pending investigation, and the state government announced compensation of 500,000 rupees, or about $7,870 for Rajesh's family. To add insult to injury, Rajesh's severed finger remained stuck in the MRI machine for nearly 18 months before his family could retrieve it for proper funeral rites. Rajesh Maru's death stands as a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when basic safety protocols are ignored.
A perfect storm of negligence, misinformation, and physics that led to one of the dumbest and most preventable deaths in medical history. It was August 2014. A chef named Pung Fon, who worked in Guangdong province in China, tragically died in an unusual way. Pung was preparing a dish that included the meat of an Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, a snake known for its deadly venom. This dish is considered a delicacy in some parts of Asia. That day, Pung had already severed the snake's head and was busy preparing the rest of its body to cook a soup. The snake's head was set aside as Pung focused on his work. About 20 minutes later, Pung went to throw the snake's head into the trash, thinking it was no longer dangerous. But to his shock, the severed head suddenly bit his hand, injecting him with venom. The venom of the Indo-Chinese spitting cobra is extremely powerful. It contains neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and eventually stopping the victim from breathing. In Pung's case, the venom started affecting him almost immediately. He had no time to react or get help before his respiratory system began to shut down. The diners in the restaurant were enjoying their meals, unaware of what was happening in the kitchen, but then they heard loud screams and a lot of noise coming from the back. Restaurant guest Lin Sun, who was there celebrating his wife's birthday, later described the chaos. "We were eating when suddenly there was a lot of noise. We didn't know what was going on but could hear people screaming from the kitchen." Realizing something was terribly wrong, the restaurant staff called for a doctor. Unfortunately, by the time medical help arrived, it was too late. Pung Fon had already died from the venom. The speed at which the venom worked left little time for anyone to save him, and without anti-venom, there was nothing that could be done. A police spokesman described the event as a highly unusual case, explaining that once the venom took hold, there was no chance of saving Pung's life. Only the anti-venom could have helped, but it wasn't given in time. It was just a tragic accident. Experts later explained how this could happen. Yang Hongchang, a snake expert with 40 years of experience, said that reptiles, including snakes, can still move for a short time after their body parts are removed, or even after they are decapitated. When a snake's head is cut off, it's technically dead because its basic body functions stop, but reflexes can still happen, he said. This means that even after being killed, the snake's head can still bite and inject venom, which is exactly what happened to Pung. The Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, the type of snake Pung was handling, is especially dangerous because of its venomous bite and its ability to spit venom with great accuracy. This snake's venom can cause severe damage and even death, as seen in Pung's case. Despite being decapitated, the snake's reflexes allowed it to bite and kill Pung, showing just how dangerous these creatures can be even after death. In some parts of Asia, snake meat is believed to have health benefits, and it is often used in traditional medicine. In Guangdong province, where Pung worked, snake meat has been eaten for centuries and is considered a delicacy. It is believed to cure various ailments and strengthen the body. This belief, however, doesn't eliminate the very real dangers involved in preparing and consuming such dangerous animals. The restaurant where Pung worked was left in shock after his death. The diners who were there that day will likely never forget the tragedy that unfolded in the kitchen. What began as an ordinary meal ended with the sudden loss of a life. It was 2010 in Sydney, Australia. Sam Ballard, a 19-year-old rugby player with a promising future ahead of him, was hanging out at his friend Jimmy Galvin's house. The group of friends were having what they called a red wine appreciation night, trying to act mature as they sipped their drinks on the patio. But one simple dare would transform this ordinary evening into the beginning of a tragic 8-year nightmare. As the friends chatted and drank, a garden slug crawled across the concrete patio. Someone at the gathering posed what seemed like a harmless question. Should I eat it? Before anyone could really think it through, Sam, young and fearless, picked up the slug and swallowed it. The friends laughed it off, and the night continued as normal. None of them could have imagined that this split-second decision would lead to devastating consequences. A few days later, Sam started feeling strange. He complained of severe pain in his legs, followed by bouts of vomiting and dizziness. His mother, Katie Ballard, initially worried that he might have multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected his father. But when Sam mentioned eating the slug, she dismissed it, saying, No one gets sick from that. She couldn't have been more wrong. The truth was far worse than anyone could have anticipated. The slug Sam had eaten was carrying rat lungworm, a parasitic worm that typically lives in rodents, but can infect slugs and snails when they eat rat droppings. When humans become infected, the parasite can cause a severe form of meningitis called eosinophilic meningoencephalitis. In Sam's case, the infection was catastrophic. The parasites had made their way to Sam's brain and spinal cord, triggering a devastating inflammatory response. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he fell into a coma that would last for 420 days. More than a year of his young life lost to darkness. When he finally woke up, the damage was severe and irreversible. The once athletic rugby player was now a quadriplegic, unable to eat without a feeding tube or move without intense effort. Sam required round-the-clock care 7 days a week. His mother, Katie, watched as her son, who she had always thought of as invincible, struggled with the most basic functions. He couldn't regulate his body temperature, suffered from seizures, and needed help with everything from eating to using the bathroom. The National Disability Insurance Scheme initially supported Sam with a $492,000 care package, but this was later slashed to just $135,000, though public outcry helped restore the funding. Despite the tragedy, Sam's friends never abandoned him. They called themselves Team Ballard and regularly visited, helping him watch rugby matches and occasionally sneaking him a taste of beer when his mother wasn't looking. Jimmy Galvin, the friend who hosted that fateful night, carried the weight of that evening heavily. He later apologized to Sam for not stopping him from eating the slug, and Sam's response was to burst into tears, showing he was still very much present mentally despite his physical limitations. For 8 years, Sam fought against the devastating effects of that one impulsive decision. His mother, Katie, remained by his side, later sharing on Facebook how the incident had devastated, changed his life forever, changed my life forever. The impact is huge. On November 2nd, 2018, at the age of 28, Sam finally succumbed to complications from his condition. His last words to his mother were, "I love you." Sam died at Hornsby Hospital, not far from where he grew up, surrounded by 20 of his closest friends and family members. His friend Jimmy later said the room was full of love during Sam's final moments. The young man who had once been full of life and promise had spent his final 8 years as a cautionary tale about how a seemingly harmless dare can have devastating consequences. Today, Sam Ballard's story serves as a sobering reminder of how a single moment of thoughtless bravado can change everything. While most people who contract the parasite recover without incident, Sam's case shows how devastating the consequences can be when things go wrong. His story continues to be shared as a warning to others that some dares aren't worth taking, no matter how harmless they might seem at the time. It was January 12, 2007, in Sacramento, California. Jennifer Strange, a 28-year-old mother of 3, woke up early that morning, excited about the possibility of winning a Nintendo Wii for her children. The local radio station KDND 107.9, known as The End, was hosting a contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. Little did Jennifer know that this simple competition would lead to her tragic demise. The contest rules were straightforward but deadly. Contestants had to drink as much water as possible without using the bathroom. Initially, they were given small 8-ounce bottles every 15 minutes. But as the competition progressed and participants dropped out, the remaining contestants, including Jennifer, were given even larger quantities to consume. During the contest, concerned listeners called in to warn about the dangers. One nurse specifically cautioned that drinking too much water could be fatal. The DJs acknowledged the risk on air, saying, "We're aware of that," but continued the contest anyway, even joking about the possibility of death while playing water-themed songs. Jennifer managed to consume nearly 2 gallons of water within just 3 hours. As the contest went on, she began complaining of severe headaches and visible discomfort. Despite her deteriorating condition, she persevered, determined to win the prize for her children. She ended up placing second, receiving only concert tickets as a consolation prize. After the contest, Jennifer called in sick to work. Her colleagues later recalled her final moments at the radio station. She was holding her head, crying from the pain. "My head hurts," she told her supervisor. "I'm going home." These would be among her last words to anyone outside her family. Hours later, Jennifer's mother made a horrifying discovery. She found her daughter's lifeless body in their Rancho Cordova home. The autopsy revealed the cruel truth. Jennifer had died from water intoxication, medically known as hyponatremia. The excessive water had diluted her blood sodium levels so severely that her brain had swollen, leading to a fatal disruption of her brain functions. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Sacramento community. 10 employees at the radio station, including the morning show hosts, were fired. Jennifer's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and in 2009, a jury awarded them $16.5 million in damages, sending a clear message about the responsibility media organizations bear for their promotional stunts. Jennifer Strange's death serves as a grim reminder that even something as seemingly harmless as water can become deadly when taken to extremes. In her final hours, she thought only of winning a prize for her children. Instead, they were left without a mother, victims of a contest that should never have happened. It was March 3, 2015, when Jennifer Walsh made the kind of decision that seems harmless until it isn't. The 34-year-old freelance graphic designer had been grinding through another brutal all-nighter in her cramped Portland studio apartment, fueled by nothing but energy drinks and desperation. Her business was hanging by a thread, and this client's deadline was make-or-break territory. For 3 weeks straight, Jennifer had been living like a zombie, 16-hour workdays blending into sleepless nights, surviving on instant meals and whatever she could nuke in her ancient microwave. The thing had been sparking and making weird noises for months, but repairs weren't exactly in the budget when you're choosing between fixing appliances and keeping the lights on. At 3:15 a.m., hunger finally won over exhaustion. Jennifer stumbled to her kitchen, determined to maximize efficiency even in her food prep. Her sleep-deprived brain had latched onto some half-remembered internet hack about cooking multiple items simultaneously to save time and electricity. She'd been arguing with her roommate about utility bills, and this seemed like the perfect way to prove microwaves weren't the energy hogs everyone claimed. What happened next was a masterclass in how not to use kitchen appliances. Jennifer loaded up her microwave like she was playing Tetris, a sealed mason jar packed with leftover soup, a hard-boiled egg still in its shell, and a closed container of Chinese takeout. But she wasn't done. Remembering something about water distributing heat evenly, she filled a coffee mug to the brim and placed it dead center of this culinary disaster waiting to happen. 8 minutes on high power. That was her plan. Cook everything at once, save time, prove a point. The microwave groaned to life, immediately protesting with loud popping sounds that would have sent any rational person running. But Jennifer wasn't rational anymore. She was running on fumes and bad decisions. Instead of backing away, she pressed her face against the door window, trying to see what was happening inside. The sealed containers began expanding like balloons at a birthday party, the egg developing ominous cracks along its surface. Jennifer watched, mesmerized by her own impending doom, as pressure built to catastrophic levels inside multiple improvised bombs. At exactly 3:17 a.m., physics took over. The mason jar exploded first, followed instantly by the hard-boiled egg, creating a chain reaction that turned Jennifer's microwave into a fragmentation grenade. The door shattered outward, sending glass shards directly into her face and neck as she peered through the window like a curious child at a fireworks show. One large fragment found its mark with surgical precision, severing her carotid artery while smaller pieces shredded her eyes and airways. Jennifer collapsed onto her kitchen floor, surrounded by a grotesque mixture of food debris, broken glass, and rapidly spreading blood. Within minutes, her makeshift efficiency experiment had efficiently ended her life. Her roommate found her 6 minutes later, awakened by what sounded like a small explosion. Paramedics arrived quickly, but Jennifer had already bled out on the linoleum floor of her studio apartment, a victim of her own exhausted logic and a fundamental misunderstanding of how pressure works. The fire department report described the cause clearly and concisely. Multiple sealed containers had been microwaved at once, effectively turning them into pressure bombs. According to her roommate, the victim had a habit of cutting corners, often choosing speed and low cost over safety, and rarely took the time to read instructions. Jennifer Walsh died because she treated her microwave like a magic box instead of the radiation-powered heating device it actually was, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is our own impatience. It was November 4th, 2012, a day like any other at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium. The animals were out, visitors were enjoying the sights, and 2-year-old Maddox Lamar Durkosh was there with his parents, Jason and Elizabeth. They were having a great time, exploring the zoo and soaking in the sights. But little did they know, this trip would end in a way none of them could ever have imagined. Maddox, just a toddler, was full of excitement. His eyes lit up at the sight of the African-painted dogs in their enclosure. The zoo had a special viewing platform for these dogs, raised about 4 feet off the ground. Visitors could look down into the enclosure, getting a great view of the animals. But this platform, designed to offer a closer look, was also risky, especially for small children. Elizabeth, wanting Maddox to see the dogs better, lifted him onto the platform's railing. It seemed like a harmless move. After all, many parents had done the same thing before. They held their kids up to get a better look at the animals. But there were warning signs. Signs that urged caution and reminded people of the dangers. But in the excitement of the moment, Elizabeth didn't think twice. Suddenly, Maddox lost his balance. In an instant, he slipped from her grasp. Time seemed to freeze as he fell. He tumbled 14 feet, missing the safety net below, the one meant to catch small objects, not a child. And just like that, Maddox landed right in the middle of the African painted dog exhibit. The world seemed to slow down, but the horror was only just beginning. The dogs, startled and confused by the sudden movement, began to react. They circled around him, unsure of what had just fallen into their midst. Within seconds, the situation turned terrifying. The zoo staff responded as fast as they could, rushing to the scene, but they couldn't get to Maddox in time. A police officer, desperate to stop the attack, fired a shot at one of the dogs, trying to scare them away. But it was too late. Maddox had already suffered fatal injuries. The crowd was in shock. The zoo's staff worked quickly to contain the remaining animals, and the African painted dogs were moved to another facility. The exhibit was immediately closed, but the damage had already been done. For Maddox's family, the nightmare was far from over. Elizabeth faced harsh criticism for lifting Maddox onto the railing, but authorities deemed it a tragic accident. The family believed the zoo had ignored safety concerns, as staff had noted the risks since 2006. While the zoo insisted it met all safety standards, the public was divided. The case was settled out of court. In the aftermath, the zoo removed the dangerous platform and relocated the painted dogs. To honor Maddox, his family started a toy truck donation drive, which became a nationwide success, ensuring his memory lived on and touching many hearts far beyond the zoo. It was September 24, 1980, and Led Zeppelin's powerhouse drummer John Bonham was preparing for the band's upcoming North American tour. At 32 years old, Bonzo was already a legend, known for his thunderous drumming that gave Led Zeppelin its distinctive sound. But on this day, his notorious appetite for alcohol would lead to one of rock music's most tragic and preventable deaths. The morning started with Bonham being picked up by Led Zeppelin's assistant Rex King. During a breakfast stop, Bonham knocked back 4 quadruple vodka screwdrivers. That's 16 shots of vodka before most people have even started their day. For context, health experts recommend no more than 1 shot per hour with water in between, but Bonham wasn't known for moderation. The band was rehearsing at guitarist Jimmy Page's house in Windsor, England. As the day progressed, Bonham continued drinking heavily, consuming vodka straight from the bottle. By the time rehearsals ended that evening, he had reportedly consumed around 40 shots, nearly 1.5 liters of 40% ABV vodka in just 12 hours. Bonham's drinking was no secret. Despite his image as a wild man of rock, those close to him knew he struggled with alcohol dependency. He had recently kicked a heroin habit but had replaced it with even heavier drinking. The pressure of touring had always been difficult for him. He hated flying, suffered from panic attacks before shows, and missed his family terribly when on the road. That morning, while riding to rehearsal with Robert Plant, Bonham had confided, "I've had it with playing drums. Everybody plays better than me." It was a surprising admission from a man widely regarded as one of the greatest drummers in rock history. By the end of rehearsals, Bonham was severely intoxicated. He passed out on a sofa and was carried to a bedroom by an assistant who carefully laid him on his side and propped him up with pillows, a precaution that tragically proved insufficient. The next morning, Led Zeppelin's road manager Benji Lefebvre and bassist John Paul Jones went to check on Bonham. They found him unresponsive and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Despite their efforts to revive him, Bonham was gone. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: pulmonary aspiration. In simple terms, Bonham had vomited in his sleep and choked on it. His body had begun rejecting the massive amount of alcohol, but in his unconscious state, he couldn't turn over or clear his airway. It was a slow, silent death that might have been prevented had someone stayed with him throughout the night. What makes Bonham's death particularly senseless is how avoidable it was. His bandmates were well aware of his drinking problem. Earlier that year, during a European tour, he had shown signs of fatigue and had been taken ill during a show in Nuremberg. The warning signs were there, but the rock and roll lifestyle normalized such excessive behavior. In the aftermath, Led Zeppelin made the decision not to continue without their drummer. On December 4, 1980, they announced their disbandment, stating that they couldn't go on without Bonham. His death effectively ended one of rock's greatest bands at the height of their powers. John Bonham's legacy as a drummer remains unparalleled. His thunderous beats on tracks like When the Levee Breaks and Kashmir continue to influence drummers today. But his death serves as a stark reminder of alcohol's dangers and the rock culture that often glorifies excess. In the end, the man who once told Robert Plant he was the greatest drummer in the world died not from some dramatic rock and roll incident, but from the simple, stupid act of drinking far too much and being left alone to sleep it off. A dumb, tragic end for a legendary musician. It was March 18, 2018, in Tempe, Arizona. The evening was clear as 49-year-old Elaine Hertzberg crossed a 4-lane road with her bicycle. At 9:58 p.m., the unthinkable happened. An Uber test vehicle operating independently in autonomous mode struck Elaine at 39 miles per hour. She died from the impact immediately. Countless and lengthy investigations were carried out to understand what went wrong. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, together with local police, searched for details of the crash that occurred on that fateful evening. All their findings pointed to human error as the primary cause. Rafaela Vasquez was in the driver's seat and was supposed to watch the vehicle as a human safety driver. However, investigations later revealed that Vasquez was not paying full attention to the road at the time of the accident. Dashcam footage released by the police showed Vasquez looking down for several seconds while the car was traveling at 39 miles per hour. She had been streaming an episode of the television show, The Voice. Despite this, Vasquez pleaded not guilty to any charges related to the accident and was released to await trial. Further complicating the situation, records from the streaming service Hulu indicated that Vasquez's device had been streaming that particular show at the time of the crash. Additionally, the autonomous vehicle itself had shortcomings. Its automatic systems failed to recognize Elaine and her bicycle as a potential threat that could lead to a collision, a critical malfunction in a technology designed to prevent such incidents. Adding to the concerns, just days before the accident, an employee had already raised issues with the vehicle's safety to the company's leaders. The employee expressed worries that the vehicles were frequently involved in accidents and questioned whether the operators, like Vasquez, were adequately trained to handle these advanced systems. These warnings, however, did not lead to any immediate action, and sadly, the fatal crash occurred, raising serious questions about the overall safety and reliability of autonomous vehicles. The police report issued in June 2018 concluded that the fatal collision could have been entirely avoidable if Vasquez had been monitoring the road. This incident sparked discussions about the safety protocols for autonomous vehicles and the crucial role that human operators play in ensuring these technologies do not pose a risk to public safety. After the incident, the state of Arizona took decisive action by suspending Uber's ability to test self-driving cars on its public roads. This move reflected growing concerns about the safety of autonomous vehicles. In response to the suspension and ongoing safety concerns, Uber ended all its autonomous vehicle tests in Arizona. However, Uber later managed to regain permission to conduct these tests in California, starting earlier in 2020, signaling a cautious continuation of their development of this technology. In July 2023, Rafaela Vasquez pleaded guilty to endangerment. This plea was a key moment in history, as it was the first time a crash involving a fully autonomous car resulted in a criminal conviction. Rafaela initially told police that she hadn't seen Elaine before the crash, claiming that Elaine came out of nowhere on a dark street in Tempe. Initially charged with negligent homicide, Rafaela eventually reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. The judge overseeing the case accepted Rafaela's plea and sentenced her to 3 years of supervised probation. Elaine Hertzberg's death marked a turning point in the development of autonomous vehicles, forcing companies to reconsider their safety protocols and the public to question the readiness of this technology for our roads. It was January 14, 2013 in Cantonment, Florida. James Campbell, a 68-year-old Vietnam veteran, had lived in the area for most of his life. He was well known and well liked, a loyal friend and family man with a simple life. But on this particular day, a series of mundane events would lead to one of the most bizarre deaths ever recorded in Florida's history. James and his wife, 56-year-old Iris Fortner, were returning home in their 1995 Chevrolet van. It was a routine they'd done countless times before. Pull up to their driveway, open the metal gates, and park the van. The couple also had a large boxer bulldog, a beloved pet that would unknowingly become an instrument of death. As they approached their home, James stepped out of the passenger side to open the metal gates, allowing the vehicle to enter. Iris remained in the driver's seat, ready to back the van into the driveway once the gates were open. As James walked towards the gates, Iris opened her door to check on his position. That's when everything went horribly wrong. Their dog, curious and excited, saw its opportunity. The large boxer jumped into the front seat, and in a freak accident that nobody could have predicted, landed right on the accelerator pedal. The van, which was in reverse gear, suddenly surged backward. Iris, caught completely off guard, desperately tried to stop the vehicle. She reached for the brake, but it was too late. The van backed into James, trapping him under its wheels. Emergency services were called immediately. Escambia County paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. James Campbell was pronounced dead at the scene. The impact had been severe, and despite Iris's frantic efforts, the accident was unavoidable. The Florida Highway Patrol conducted an investigation into the incident. The sequence of events seemed almost too bizarre to be true. A man killed by his own dog, accidentally pressing the accelerator. Yet the evidence was clear. James had exited the van to open the gates, Iris had opened the door to check on his position, and their dog had jumped into the driver's seat, inadvertently pressing the accelerator. Local news outlets covered the story extensively. Neighbors and friends expressed their condolences, sharing their grief and disbelief. Many described James, affectionately known as Beau, as a good friend and a devoted family man. He was a graduate of Tate High School and a veteran who had served his country in Vietnam, only to meet his end in such an unbelievable way. Despite the overwhelming support, there were whispers of suspicion. Some questioned the probability of such an accident, suggesting there might be more to the story. However, the official reports and eyewitness accounts left little room for doubt. It was simply a tragic accident, a series of unfortunate events that led to the loss of a beloved community member. The dog, who had unintentionally caused the accident, remained with Iris. The boxer bulldog wasn't blamed for its actions. It had acted out of excitement and curiosity, with no way of understanding the consequences of its actions. Iris suffered minor injuries but was not charged with any wrongdoing. She was left to cope with the loss of her husband in what must be one of the most bizarre accidents in Florida's history. Today, James Campbell's death serves as a reminder of how unpredictable life can be. In a matter of seconds, a routine activity, a beloved pet, and a simple check on someone's position combine to create a perfect storm of tragedy. It's the kind of death that makes you realize sometimes the most dangerous moments aren't the ones we prepare for. They're the ordinary ones we never see coming. It was February 4th, 1912, when the streets of Paris stirred with unusual excitement. At the foot of the Eiffel Tower, a crowd began to gather, drawn by whispers of an Austrian-born tailor's daring plan. Franz Reichelt, 33, stood among them, his specially designed parachute suit concealing the nervous beating of his heart. The tower's iron lattice stretched above him like a silent witness to what would become his final act of invention. Born in the small town of Wegstadel, Austria, Reichelt had moved to Paris at age 19 with dreams of making his mark on the world. He quickly established himself as a respected tailor at 8 Rue Gaillon, earning the nickname the Flying Tailor among his peers. But as the dawn of aviation brought both excitement and tragedy to the skies of Europe, Reichelt's mind turned to a different kind of creation. Since 1910, he had been obsessed with solving aviation's deadliest problem, how to save pilots from crashes. His workshop became a laboratory of experimentation, with silk and rubber replacing normal tailoring materials. His design was ambitious, a silk canopy concealed within an outfit, supported by rods and rubber, spanning 320 square feet of fabric. It was meant to transform from an ordinary suit into a life-saving parachute in moments of crisis. The early tests were far from promising. From his workshop's 5th floor, Reichelt conducted numerous experiments with dummies. Each time the results were the same. The dummies plummeted straight to the ground, the silk canopy tangling uselessly around them. But Reichelt remained undeterred. He was convinced the problem wasn't his design, it was the height. He needed more elevation for his invention to work properly. After months of relentless petitioning, Reichelt finally secured permission from Paris Police Chief Louis Lepine to conduct a test at the Eiffel Tower. The police, newspaper reporters, and camera crews arrived early that morning, expecting to document a routine dummy test. Instead, they found Reichelt in his bulky suit, announcing his intention to jump himself. His friends were horrified. "You're going to kill yourself," they warned. Even the security guard stationed at the tower made a final plea. "I beg you, don't do this." But Reichelt stood firm. With unwavering conviction, he declared, "I want to try the experiment myself, and without trickery, as I intend to prove the worth of my invention." The temperature was well below freezing as Reichelt made his way to the first platform, 187 feet above the frozen ground. His suit, weighing nearly 20 pounds, made him look more like a medieval knight than an inventor. The Pathé cameras rolled as he climbed onto a small table near the edge, releasing scraps of paper to test the wind direction. For 40 excruciating seconds, Reichelt stood at the precipice. The crowd below held their breath. Perhaps in those moments, as the cold wind whipped around him, doubt finally crept into his mind. But with journalists watching and his reputation at stake, he couldn't back down. With a final, "À bientôt," see you soon, to his friends, he spread his arms like wings and stepped into empty air. The failure was instantaneous and catastrophic. Instead of billowing out as designed, the suit's fabric wrapped around him like a burial shroud. Reichelt fell like a stone, his body rotating slightly before striking the frozen ground with devastating force. The impact created a 6-inch deep crater, sending shards of ice and dirt into the air. Police rushed to the scene, finding a scene that would haunt them forever. Reichelt's right leg and arm were crushed, his skull and spine shattered beyond recognition. Blood seeped from his mouth, nose, and ears, staining the frozen ground crimson. His eyes remained open, frozen in an expression of final terror. Though death was obvious, protocol demanded he be taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors officially pronounced his passing at 8:45 a.m. The next day, newspapers worldwide carried the story of the Flying Tailor's tragic end. Headlines called him everything from a mad genius to a martyred inventor. The British Pathé footage of his jump became one of the earliest filmed records of a fatal accident, preserving forever the moment when absolute conviction proved fatal. In a cruel twist of fate, just months after Reichelt's death, Russian inventor Gleb Kotelnikov successfully demonstrated the first knapsack parachute, a design that would revolutionize aviation safety and save countless lives. But Reichelt's story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes unwavering belief in one's ideas can be as dangerous as doubt itself. Today, visitors to the Eiffel Tower walk past the spot where Reichelt fell, most unaware they're standing where a determined inventor took his final leap. His death remains a powerful cautionary tale about the fine line between visionary courage and fatal obsession. It was September 16, 2016, when Michael Davis made the fatal mistake that would end his life at just 31 years old. The insurance adjuster from rural Montana had recently purchased his first handgun, a Glock 19, after completing a basic firearm safety course just 3 weeks earlier. With hunting season approaching and plans to join his father-in-law on his first hunting trip, Michael was eager to improve his shooting skills. That Saturday afternoon, the private outdoor range sat empty under the Montana sky, with no range safety officer present to supervise. Michael had been practicing for over an hour, feeling increasingly confident with each shot. However, despite his recent training, he had developed dangerous habits from watching too many action movies, including the deadly practice of keeping his finger on the trigger while handling his weapon. At 3:20 p.m., after finishing his target practice, Michael decided to clean his pistol at the shooting bench. This routine maintenance should have been straightforward, but Michael made a critical error that would prove fatal. He removed the magazine from his Glock but failed to perform the most basic safety check, ensuring no round remained chambered in the barrel. As he began the disassembly process, Michael struggled with the unfamiliar mechanism. To get a better angle on the disassembly lever, he pointed the muzzle directly toward his chest. His finger remained dangerously positioned on the trigger as he applied increasing pressure, fighting with the stubborn components. The chambered 9mm hollow point round fired without warning, the muzzle flash searing his shirt as the bullet entered just below his sternum at point-blank range. The hollow-point ammunition performed exactly as designed, expanding rapidly as it tore through his diaphragm and into his heart. The devastating projectile ripped through his left ventricle, creating massive internal damage before exiting through his back with a 2-inch wound. Michael dropped the smoking pistol and staggered backward, blood pouring from both entry and exit wounds. His heart, now filling rapidly with blood, began failing within seconds. Cardiac tamponade set in as the blood-filled pericardium prevented his heart from beating effectively. Within 30 seconds, he collapsed in cardiac arrest, his body shutting down from catastrophic blood loss. 20 minutes later, a neighboring rancher investigating the gunshot discovered Michael's lifeless body sprawled beside the shooting bench. The scene told the tragic story: a loaded weapon, an empty magazine nearby, and blood pooling beneath the victim who had violated every fundamental rule of gun safety. Michael's eagerness to practice had been overshadowed by his failure to respect the deadly potential of his weapon. In his rush to become proficient, he had forgotten the most important lesson from his safety course: treat every gun as if it's loaded, because sometimes it is. It was January 7, 2014 in Xinjiang City, China, a bustling town where traditional life met the modern world, when a seemingly trivial event quickly turned into a nightmare. Li Meilan, a 32-year-old woman, was visiting her husband's family for a quiet day. She had just used an open-pit toilet, a common sight in rural parts of China, where a simple structure with a hole in the ground was used for waste disposal. As she rose from the toilet, her brand new phone, a shiny, expensive device worth 2,000 yuan, roughly $320, slipped from her hand and fell straight into the deep pit below, disappearing into the muck. Now, for most people, this would have been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It was just a phone after all. But for Meilan, it was a catastrophe. The phone wasn't just an expensive item. It was a symbol of her hard work and her connection to the world beyond the village. There was no way she could let it go. Without a second thought, she called her husband for help, her voice filled with urgency and desperation. Her husband, knowing how much this phone meant to her, didn't hesitate. He rushed over, thinking that retrieving the phone would be an easy task. But as he jumped into the pit, something went terribly wrong. The pit, a deep, dark hole filled with the remnants of human waste, also held something far more dangerous: toxic fumes. A mixture of gases, invisible but deadly, filled the air. As soon as he landed, the fumes overwhelmed him, and he collapsed, losing consciousness almost immediately. His body, vulnerable and unprepared, succumbed to the toxic air. Li Meilan, helpless and panicked, could only stand there for a brief moment, staring in horror at her husband. But what she didn't know was that the fumes, while invisible to the naked eye, were lethal. The toxic air, which had caused her husband to collapse, would soon claim others. Her mother-in-law, seeing her son fall into unconsciousness, screamed and rushed to his aid, but the pit offered no mercy. She too jumped in, desperate to save him. Just like her son, she was overcome by the gases and fell unconscious, crumpling to the ground beside him. Meilan, standing on the edge of the pit, could only watch as the situation spiraled out of control. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. What could she do? Who could she call for help? But time was running out. The more she thought, the more she realized that if she didn't act, it would be too late. Driven by love and fear, she made the decision to climb into the pit. The moment her feet touched the ground, the thick, suffocating fumes hit her hard. She didn't have time to scream, didn't have time to call out for help. The gases filled her lungs, and in mere seconds, she too collapsed, unconscious and vulnerable. Now the entire family was trapped. The father-in-law, standing helplessly by the side, could only watch in horror. His family members, once full of life, were now lying unconscious in the filthy pit. He could feel his heart racing as he tried to figure out a way to save them. But what could he do? How could he rescue them from the pit of death? In a final, desperate act of love and fear, he jumped in as well. But just like the others, he was overpowered by the toxic gases and fell unconscious, adding to the growing list of victims in the pit. Time seemed to slow down. As the toxic fumes swirled around the pit, Everyone who had jumped in was now lying unconscious in the muck. But outside, the neighbors were beginning to hear the commotion. The sound of people yelling, shouting for help must have reached their ears. Quickly, they gathered together, not knowing the full scope of the danger, but understanding that something was very wrong. Without wasting a moment, they ran to the pit, determined to help. But even as they tried to rescue the family, they weren't safe. The toxic air had no mercy, and it soon began to affect the rescuers. One neighbor, despite his best efforts, collapsed, fainting from the overwhelming fumes. Panic set in as they realized that this was far more dangerous than they had initially thought. The neighbors, however, didn't give up. They lowered ropes into the pit, one by one, carefully pulling each family member to safety. It felt like hours, but finally the entire family and the two neighbors were pulled out of the pit. But by that time, the damage was done. Maylon's husband and mother-in-law had died from the exposure. Their bodies had simply been overwhelmed by the toxic fumes in such a short amount of time. Maylon, her father-in-law, and the two neighbors were alive, but barely. They were rushed to the hospital, all of them in critical condition. Despite the quick response, it was clear that the loss was already irreversible. Authorities quickly arrived, investigating the situation and trying to piece together what had happened. They found that the family had only been in the pit for about 5 minutes, but that was more than enough time for the gases to do their damage. If help had arrived just a few minutes earlier, maybe, just maybe, the outcome would have been different. But the truth was that the damage was done, and nothing could bring back the lives lost. The community was left in shock, unable to comprehend how a simple act of retrieving a phone had led to such a devastating loss. Maylon's uncle, overwhelmed by grief, could hardly believe what had happened. He stood in disbelief, asking over and over, "What are we supposed to do now?" His words, full of pain and confusion, echoed through the quiet town. The phone, the very object that had caused this entire tragedy, was never found. And by the time anyone had thought to search for it, it no longer mattered. The real tragedy was the lives lost, the family torn apart by a decision that, in hindsight, seemed so small. Lee Maylon, now left without her husband and mother-in-law, would forever carry the weight of that moment with her. It was September 23, 2017, at the Place Talgarth Holiday Complex near Machynlleth, Wales. Elizabeth Isherwood, a 60-year-old former policewoman from Wolverhampton, had just arrived for what should have been a relaxing week-long getaway. Known as Mary to her friends and family, she was visiting the timeshare one final time before the family sold their share. Little did she know that this vacation would end in one of the most horrifying and bizarre deaths imaginable. Elizabeth was fit and active for her age. She played golf regularly, cared for her grandchildren, and worked part-time as a carer. Her life had been full and varied. She'd been a police officer, a teacher, and even worked for the post office before moving to New Zealand for a decade. Now, back in the UK, she was enjoying her golden years surrounded by family. That first night at the holiday apartment, Elizabeth went to bed without even unpacking her suitcase. In the middle of the night, she got up to use the ensuite bathroom. What happened next was a tragic sequence of events that would lead to her death. In the darkness, disoriented and naked, Elizabeth mistakenly walked into the airing cupboard instead of back to her bedroom. The door closed behind her, and when she tried to open it, the door handle broke off in her hand. She was trapped in a space barely larger than a phone booth, with no light and no way to call for help. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival that lasted nearly 2 days. Using remarkable strength and determination, Elizabeth broke off a copper pipe inside the cupboard and used it as a tool to try to break through the walls. She managed to claw through brickwork and plaster, creating a hole almost large enough to escape through. She had made a hole big enough to climb through, her son Craig later explained, but didn't realize her way out was only blocked by a picture screwed to the other side of the wall. In a cruel twist of fate, the broken pipe began spraying cold water throughout the tiny cupboard. As Elizabeth continued her frantic efforts to escape, she became soaked. With no clothes and no way to dry off, hypothermia set in quickly. The very tool she was using to try to save herself was contributing to her death. Throughout her ordeal, Elizabeth's cries for help went unheard. A couple in a neighboring apartment later reported hearing banging noises, but assumed it was maintenance work. They had decided they would report it if it continued after 5 p.m. But the sounds stopped just after 5, likely when Elizabeth became too weak to continue. For a full week, no one knew anything was wrong. It was only when maintenance staff came to investigate a water leak that they made the grim discovery. They found Elizabeth's body in the airing cupboard, her clothes and suitcase still untouched in the bedroom. The coroner ruled her death as misadventure, concluding she died of hypothermia after becoming trapped. Her son Craig was devastated, describing his mother as fit and healthy with years of a very happy life ahead of her. The tragedy prompted Craig to sue McDonald Resorts, the owners of the holiday complex, alleging negligence in maintaining the door handle. "This should never have happened," he said. "I just want the company to admit they made a mistake and make sure this cannot happen to anyone else." Elizabeth's story is a chilling reminder of how quickly an ordinary situation can turn deadly. A simple wrong turn in the night, a faulty door handle, and a series of unfortunate circumstances combined to create a nightmare scenario that ended in an unimaginable death, alone, cold, and trapped just inches away from freedom. It was 1995 in Poland, and a tragic and bizarre event occurred that left the entire country stunned. Krzysztof Asninski, a 30-year-old farmer, lost his life in a shocking attempt to prove his manliness. Krzysztof was known in his village as a strong and hardworking man. He spent most of his days tending to his farm, doing the tough physical labor that defined his life. Like many men in his community, Krzysztof enjoyed spending his evenings with friends, sharing drinks and talking about life. On one cold winter night, what began as a normal gathering among friends turned into something much darker. That evening, Krzysztof and his friends met in a small barn on his property. The group was drinking heavily, and as the night wore on, their conversation took a dangerous turn. It wasn't unusual for them to play what they called men's games, but these games were far from harmless. They were competitive, risky, and fueled by a need to prove who was the toughest among them. The night started with the men hitting each other on the head with frozen turnips. It was painful, but in their minds it was a test of strength and endurance. Laughter echoed through the barn, but underneath it there was a tension, a silent competition that no one wanted to lose. They were driven by pride, each man trying to show he could take more pain than the others. But things took a terrifying turn when one of Krzysztof's friends decided to up the stakes. He grabbed a chainsaw that had been lying around and, in a shocking move, cut off the end of his own foot. The barn fell silent as the reality of what he had done sank in. Blood poured from his wound, but instead of stopping the madness, it seemed to urge the others to do more. Krzysztof, feeling the pressure not to be outdone, made a decision that would cost him his life. In his drunken state, he believed he had to prove that he was even tougher than his friend. He took the chainsaw, looked at his friends and shouted, "Watch this then." With those words, he swung the chainsaw at his own head. The scene that followed was horrifying. The chainsaw cut through Krzysztof's neck, severing his head from his body. He died instantly, his body collapsing to the ground as his friends watched in shock and disbelief. The reality of what had just happened hit them hard. Their friend was dead, and nothing could bring him back. The news of Krzysztof Asninski's death quickly spread beyond the village. People couldn't believe the lengths he had gone to in order to prove his manhood. It wasn't long before his story was included in a study published in the British Medical Journal. This study looked at people who had died in foolish ways and found that the majority were men. The researchers suggested that men are often more willing to take unnecessary risks to prove themselves, especially when alcohol is involved. Krzysztof's death was also mentioned in connection with the Darwin Awards, a darkly humorous honor given to people who die in the most foolish ways, effectively removing themselves from the gene pool. His story stood out as one of the most extreme examples of toxic masculinity and the deadly consequences it can have. Looking back at what happened that night, it's impossible not to wonder what could have been different. What if Krzysztof and his friends hadn't been drinking so much? What if someone had stopped the games before they got out of hand? In the end, no amount of pride is worth the cost of a life. It was April 1988 at the Franklin County Sports Parachute Center in North Carolina. Ivan Lester McGuire, a 35-year-old expert skydiver with over 800 successful jumps under his belt, was gearing up for what should have been another routine day of filming student jumpers. As a skilled parachutist and videographer, he'd done this countless times before, carrying his camera equipment to capture the thrilling moments of first-time skydivers. His reputation in the skydiving community was stellar. He was known for his attention to detail, and his passion for capturing the perfect shot of newcomers experiencing their first taste of freefall. On this particular day, McGuire was preparing to film a student and an instructor from the center. He was tired from previous jumps but determined to get the perfect shot. As he boarded the plane with his video equipment, something was terribly wrong, something that wouldn't become apparent until it was far too late. The plane climbed to an altitude of 10,500 feet. McGuire, focused on getting his camera equipment ready, went through his usual pre-jump routine. The student and instructor were ready, and when the moment came, they all jumped from the aircraft. The cool air rushed past them as they began their free fall, with McGuire filming the entire descent. But as they approached the moment when parachutes should be deployed, something horrifying dawned on McGuire. The camera attached to his helmet captured what would become his final moments. In a chilling revelation, he reached for his ripcord only to realize there was nothing there. In his focus on the filming equipment, he had forgotten to put on his parachute. The voice-activated camera recorded his last desperate moments. Investigators who later reviewed the footage reported hearing what sounded like, "Oh no," just after McGuire's left hand came into view, frantically searching for a parachute that wasn't there. The camera continued recording as the ground approached at 150 miles per hour, capturing McGuire's final descent. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an investigation into the incident, particularly focusing on whether pilot Mark Luman had checked if McGuire was wearing a parachute before takeoff. FAA Inspector Walter Rigsby pointed to Regulation Number 105, which clearly stated that no one may jump unless the pilot checks their parachute. But somehow, on this day, an experienced skydiver had boarded a plane without the most crucial piece of equipment. Investigators believe that McGuire's fatal mistake might have been due to fatigue or his preoccupation with the video equipment. The weight of his camera gear, similar to that of a packed parachute, might have fooled him into thinking he was properly equipped. Nancy Fayard, the wife of the parachute center's owner, later stated, "No one was aware that he got on the plane without a parachute. Of course, no one knew or they would have stopped him." The investigation ruled out suicide, concluding this was simply a tragic accident, a momentary lapse in judgment that cost McGuire his life. His body was found about 1.5 miles from the airfield he had taken off from, a grim reminder of how even the most experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes. McGuire's death sent shockwaves through the skydiving community. Here was a man who had completed hundreds of successful jumps, who knew every safety protocol by heart, yet had somehow forgotten the most basic and essential piece of equipment. It was a stark reminder that no matter how routine something becomes, one moment of distraction can have devastating consequences. The incident led to significant changes in pre-jump protocols across the country. Many skydiving centers implemented mandatory equipment checklists and buddy systems, where jumpers would cross-check each other's gear before boarding. The tragedy also sparked discussions about the dangers of complacency in high-risk activities, and the importance of maintaining focus regardless of experience level. Today, Ivan McGuire's story serves as a sobering lesson in skydiving schools across the country. His death led to stricter pre-jump safety checks and a renewed emphasis on the importance of following basic safety protocols, no matter how experienced the jumper might be. In the end, McGuire's final jump became a tragic reminder that in skydiving, as in life, there are some mistakes you only get to make once. It was December 21st, 2013, in McLeod, Oklahoma, where the winter air hung heavy with tension. In a modest trailer home, two men were about to turn a typical evening into one of the most bizarre cases in criminal history. Denver Lee Street Clare, a 58-year-old man with a complicated reputation, and his stepson Brad Davis, a 33-year-old former Marine, had a volatile relationship that was about to reach its breaking point. The relationship between Denver and his family had always been strained. In 2008, his wife Tresia had filed a permanent protective order against him, claiming he had grabbed her by the neck and thrown her through a bathroom door. The couple had attempted to divorce multiple times, but the cases were often dismissed. This tumultuous environment had deeply affected Brad's relationship with his stepfather. That evening, with Tresia away at the hospital recovering from hip surgery, the two men found themselves alone. They had been drinking, and the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. What started as verbal jabs escalated when Denver allegedly spoke ill of Brad's mother, igniting a powder keg of long, simmering resentment. According to Brad's testimony, the confrontation had deeper roots. Denver had allegedly threatened to blame Brad for a fire that had destroyed Denver's repair shop in August 2013. This threat was apparently retaliation for Tresia discovering and reporting Denver's insurance fraud to the police. He kept on telling me how sorry my mommy was, how sorry I was, Brad would later testify. The argument turned physical when Denver allegedly threw the first punch, coming at Brad with what he described as a look of pure rage. Brad, claiming self-defense, fought back. But what happened next would make this case infamous. Brad knocked his stepfather unconscious and then performed what became known as an atomic wedgie, pulling Denver's underwear up and over his head from behind. The elastic band of Denver's blue underwear wrapped around his neck, creating a deadly ligature. The cloth had completely separated from the waistband due to the force used. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were confronted with something unprecedented in their careers: a death by underwear. The investigation revealed a disturbing sequence of events. Text messages showed Brad had contacted a friend before the confrontation, suggesting premeditation and stating he had nothing to lose. However, Brad maintained he never intended to kill his stepfather, only to embarrass him. He even took photos of his unconscious stepfather with his phone before realizing the severity of what had occurred. Sheriff Mike Booth would later tell reporters, "I'd never seen this before, but when we first looked at our victim, seeing the waistband of his underwear was around his neck." The medical examiner determined that Denver died from a combination of blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. Initially charged with first-degree murder, Brad Davis pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in May 2015 as part of a plea deal. During his mitigation hearing, he told Judge John G. Canavan Jr., "I was panicked, mad, scared. It's like a bad dream. Things got out of hand." He expressed deep remorse, stating, "I never had any intention of killing that man. There's no way I ever thought that could have happened." Despite character witnesses describing Brad as a good person willing to help others, prosecutors sought a 35-year prison sentence. On July 16, 2015, Brad Davis was sentenced to 30 years in prison for what became known as the atomic wedgie killing, a tragic reminder of how quickly anger and violence can lead to unintended consequences, and how years of family dysfunction can culminate in a moment of deadly rage. It was November 28, 1992, when Greg Austin Gingrich, the kind of dad who could always make you laugh, took his teenage daughter on a trip to the Grand Canyon. To anyone who knew Greg, it was no surprise. He was famous for his pranks, always playing jokes that had people rolling with laughter. His daughter loved him for it. They shared a close bond, one built on laughter, adventure, and those unforgettable moments that would make both of them smile for years. They were a team, always in sync with each other's humor. But little did they know, this trip would take a tragic turn, one that would leave their world shattered forever. The Grand Canyon, a place so majestic and vast that it leaves people speechless. Towering cliffs, deep valleys, and rock formations that stretch for miles and miles, painted in reds, oranges, and browns by the setting sun. It's a place that attracts millions of visitors every year. But for all its beauty, the Grand Canyon also has a dark side. Its dangerous edges and steep cliffs that can be a trap for those who don't respect them. Greg, though, wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about fun. And in his mind, fun meant pulling off one of his classic pranks. Standing near the edge of a guard wall with the canyon stretched out before him, Greg had a mischievous grin on his face. His daughter had seen these jokes before. She knew him well. But this time, would be different. Greg had planned it perfectly. He would pretend to lose his balance and stumble, flailing his arms wildly as if he was about to fall. The goal was to scare his daughter just for a second. Then, he'd land safely on a small slope below, springing up and laughing. "Gotcha," he'd say, making it clear it was all a joke. It would be one of those moments that would go down in family history, the kind they'd laugh about for years to come. But this time, something went horribly wrong. What Greg hadn't realized was how close the drop really was, and how far the slope was from where he stood. His idea of a harmless prank turned into a nightmare. Greg slipped. Just like that, his foot lost grip on the edge, and suddenly he was falling. His body twisted in the air as the ground below seemed to rush up to meet him. The canyon that had once felt so vast and beautiful now felt like a trap. His arms flailed, trying to grab hold of something, anything, but the force of the fall was too strong. It all happened so fast. One moment, he was there, goofing off, and the next, he was gone. His daughter, walking ahead a few steps, turned around with a smile. She was used to his jokes. She was probably waiting for him to pop up from below the ledge, laughing it off as he always did. But when she looked back and saw no sign of him, her smile quickly faded. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling. She waited, thinking he was just messing around, but the seconds turned into minutes. Something was wrong. Her heart began to race. She ran back to the edge, peering down, calling his name louder, panic creeping into her voice. She couldn't see him. The canyon seemed so vast, so endless, like it had swallowed him whole. Then, the park rangers arrived. They began searching the area, combing through the rocky cliffs and the paths below. The air was thick with tension as they radioed each other, calling in reinforcements. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, in the distance, one of the rangers spotted something: Greg's body at the bottom of the canyon. The fall had been nearly 400 feet. The family was left in complete shock. His daughter, standing at the edge, couldn't believe it. One moment she had been laughing with her dad, sharing a joke. The next, he was gone. The grief and disbelief flooded over her. The world around her felt like it had shattered. The tragedy was not just the loss of Greg, but the way it all unfolded. Greg had always been careful. He knew the Grand Canyon. He'd been there before. He never imagined his own prank would be the one thing that took him down. Nature, unforgiving and powerful, doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about your jokes. It simply reacts to your actions. His daughter was left with the painful memory of her father, gone in an instant. The man who had always made her laugh, the man who could do anything for her, was gone because of a simple, impulsive decision. Greg's story became a cautionary tale for many. It reminded people of the dangers of the Grand Canyon and how a simple lapse in judgment could lead to tragedy. It was a painful lesson learned too late, but one that would not be forgotten. But not all moments of tragedy happen in such dramatic ways. Some occur in places where you least expect it. It was August 8, 2017, when Patricia Patty Thompson's lifelong Hawaiian dream became her worst nightmare at Waikiki Beach, Honolulu. At 52, this retired Ohio teacher had finally made it to paradise after decades of pinching pennies. Her late husband used to tease her about being too cheap for her own good, but Patty wore that badge with pride. She'd spent months planning this trip, hunting for every possible deal and discount. That morning, while scrolling through her phone over continental breakfast, Patty discovered what she thought was the ultimate Hawaiian hack. Fresh coconuts at the hotel gift shop cost $12 each, but according to a 3-minute YouTube video she'd just watched, they were completely free if you knew how to harvest them yourself. Energized by her new knowledge, Patty glanced out at the palm trees swaying just beyond the hotel patio. Surely, she thought, it couldn't be that difficult to grab a coconut or two. But as she made her way through the lobby, she started to notice just how seriously the Hilton Hawaiian Village took coconut safety. The hotel had plastered warning signs everywhere about falling coconuts. Yellow caution tape surrounded several palm trees. Staff members had verbally warned guests during check-in, and every room came with a safety pamphlet. Patty had tossed hers straight into the trash without a second glance. At 10:30 a.m., armed with her selfie stick and an overconfident attitude, Patty marched toward a towering 40-foot coconut palm loaded with mature fruit. Despite the clearly posted warning signs, she dismissed them as nothing more than overly cautious hotel liability measures. Having grown up on a farm in Ohio, she believed she was perfectly capable of handling herself around falling objects. Positioning herself directly beneath the tree, Patty held up her phone to document her free coconut adventure for Facebook. She could already imagine the jealous comments from her former teaching colleagues back in Cleveland. Above her head, 3 coconuts, each weighing roughly 3 pounds, had been loosened by recent tropical winds. As Patty heard the ominous cracking sounds, any reasonable person would have stepped away. Instead, she spread her arms wider, convinced she could catch multiple coconuts simultaneously, like a circus performer. The first coconut plummeted from 35 feet and slammed into the ground just inches from Patty's feet, sending a sharp crack through the courtyard. Dirt and small shards of husk sprayed her legs. But instead of taking it as a warning, she laughed it off and stepped closer to the trunk. Emboldened, she looked up and shouted, daring the tree for more. The second coconut sealed her fate. Falling from the same height, it struck the back of her skull with approximately 1,000 pounds per square inch of force. The impact created a depressed skull fracture, driving bone fragments directly into her brain tissue. Massive intracranial bleeding began immediately, as her brain started swelling against the confines of her skull. The third coconut hit her spine as she collapsed, but the damage was already done. Patty lay unconscious on the sand, her selfie stick still clutched in her hand, as horrified beachgoers rushed to help. Within 4 minutes, brain herniation had claimed her life. Paramedics arrived quickly but could only pronounce her dead at the scene, her phone still recording the tragic final moments of her bargain hunting adventure. The hotel responded immediately, installed additional warning barriers, implementing daily coconut removal services, and requiring all guests to attend a mandatory safety briefing.
It was March 27, 2009 in Long Beach, California. The morning air carried that distinctive mix of salt and diesel that's familiar to anyone who spends time at sea. For Jeff Twaddle, a 54-year-old deckhand with weathered hands and a quick smile, it was just another day aboard the charter boat Gale Force. But this ordinary Friday would end in one of the most bizarre tragedies the local maritime community had ever witnessed. The Gale Force, a 55-foot vessel captained by Dan Salas, had been chartered by the Los Angeles Unified School District for an educational fishing trip. About 20 elementary school students boarded that morning, their excited voices filling the air as the boat pulled away from Rainbow Harbor. These trips were routine, a chance for city kids to experience the ocean, learn about marine life, and try their hand at fishing along the breakwater. Jeff had been working on charter boats for years. With his friendly demeanor and patient nature, he was particularly good with children. He knew how to ease their fears about handling bait, how to help them cast their lines, and most importantly, how to make them laugh. That ability to entertain was a valuable skill on a boat full of young students, some of whom had never been on the water before. As the morning progressed and the fishing began in earnest, Jeff moved about the deck, assisting students and keeping spirits high. The fish weren't biting particularly well that day, and some of the children were growing restless. That's when Jeff decided to perform a little trick, something he'd probably done before to amuse passengers. In a fateful moment that would prove catastrophically misjudged, Jeff grabbed a bait fish from the bucket and, with a playful flourish, popped it into his mouth. It was meant to be a silly gag, something to make the kids giggle and refocus their attention. But within seconds, the situation turned dire. The fish became lodged in his throat, blocking his airway completely. The children watched in confusion, then horror, as Jeff's expression changed from playful to panicked. He began to choke, his face reddening as he struggled for breath. The other crew members quickly realized something was terribly wrong and rushed to his aid. Jeff collapsed on the deck as his colleagues desperately tried to dislodge the fish from his throat. It sounds like he was trying to be lighthearted and make the students laugh when he put the fish in his mouth. Long Beach Fire Department Battalion Chief Frank Hayes would later tell reporters, his voice somber as he recounted the tragedy. Despite frantic efforts to perform CPR, Jeff remained unresponsive. The boat made an emergency return to the harbor where paramedics were waiting, but by then, precious minutes had elapsed. Jeff was rushed to St. Mary Medical Center, but doctors couldn't save him. He was pronounced dead at 1:15 p.m., less than 2 hours after his playful stunt had gone so horribly wrong. The Los Angeles County coroner later confirmed what witnesses already knew. Jeff had died from aspiration of fish, a cause of death so unusual that it made headlines across the country and even internationally. Captain Salas, visibly shaken by the loss of his crew member, told the Press-Telegram it was a tragic freak accident that had left everyone aboard the Gale Force devastated. For the elementary school students who witnessed the incident, what should have been an educational adventure became a traumatic experience. The school district immediately sent notes home to parents explaining the tragic event and offered grief counseling for the children. Jeff Twaddle's death serves as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, how a simple joke, a moment intended to bring joy, can unexpectedly turn fatal. 1 minute he was performing for laughing children. The next he was fighting for his last breath on the deck of the boat where he had spent so many days. In the annals of bizarre and unexpected deaths, Jeff's story stands out not just for its unusual nature,
but for the ordinary circumstances in which it occurred. A regular day on the water, a simple attempt to entertain, and a fatal outcome that no one could have possibly predicted. It was May 15, 2011, in Brisbane, Australia, and 20-year-old Acton Beale was returning home after a night out with friends. The internet craze of planking was sweeping social networking sites, and Acton, like many young people, had embraced the trend. Planking involved lying face down in unusual or risky places while someone took a photo to share online. The more dangerous the location, the more attention the photo would receive. That night, as Acton arrived at his apartment building, he decided to attempt a daring plank on the balcony railing of his 7th floor unit. The railing was only 2 inches wide, making it an extremely precarious perch. His friend watched as Acton positioned himself for the stunt. As he attempted to lie down on the narrow railing, Acton suddenly lost his balance. In a horrifying moment, he plummeted 7 stories to the ground below. The fall was devastating and immediate. Emergency services rushed to the scene, and paramedics worked desperately to revive him for 20 minutes, but their efforts were in vain. Acton was pronounced dead at the scene. Deputy Police Commissioner Ross Barnett later confirmed that Acton had been drinking before the accident, which likely impaired his judgment and balance. In some circumstances, planking can be fairly harmless, Barnett explained to reporters. But once you start taking it up 7 stories, or on top of a set of traffic lights, or on a set of railway lines, or on a bridge, it's putting a person in significant danger. The news of Acton's death spread quickly, shocking both the local community and the online world. Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard even addressed the tragedy, urging people to consider safety first. Everybody likes a bit of fun, but focus has to be on keeping yourself safe first. On social media, reactions were mixed. Some expressed genuine sorrow for the loss of a young life, while others continued to post their own planking photos, seemingly undeterred by the risks. The Planking Australia Facebook page, which had about 55,000 followers before the incident, saw its membership surge to over 87,000 in the days following Acton's death. One Facebook user wrote in response to the tragedy, "One life has been lost because of this. Think of what could happen if it went wrong." But others seemed to view Acton's death as a challenge rather than a warning, with some users encouraging even more extreme planking stunts. The incident came just days after Queensland Police had charged a man for planking on a police car in Gladstone. At that time, they had issued their first warning about the dangers of the trend, particularly when performed in risky locations. Now their worst fears had been realized. Sam Weckert, the founder of the Planking Facebook group, issued a statement following Acton's death. "Planking was started as a fun and quirky pastime, and while we have no control over the actions of others, we'd like to encourage any members of the planking group and the general public to undertake this in a safe and responsible fashion." For Acton's family and friends, the tragedy was devastating. What had begun as a night out ended in an unimaginable loss. His death highlighted the dangerous influence of social media trends that encourage increasingly risky behavior for the sake of likes and attention. In the weeks that followed, authorities across Australia increased their warnings about dangerous planking, but the trend continued to spread globally. Acton Beale became known as the first victim of a social media craze that valued viral fame over personal safety. The legacy of Acton's death serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly a moment of thrill-seeking can turn fatal. As one police officer put it, "Ultimately, is it worth life in a wheelchair to take a funny photo to impress somebody you don't know on the internet?" It was September 28, 1567, in the picturesque town of Braunau am Inn, Austria. Hans Steininger was no ordinary man. He was the town's burgomaster, what we'd call a mayor today, and he had been elected to this position 6 times in a row. But what made Hans truly remarkable wasn't his political career, it was his beard. This wasn't just any beard. It was an extraordinary 4.5-foot-long masterpiece that had become his trademark. On a typical day, Hans would carefully roll up his massive beard and tuck it safely into his pocket before going about his business. He was well loved by the townspeople, known for his leadership and, of course, that magnificent facial hair that trailed behind him when unleashed. But on this particular evening, a series of events would unfold that would turn his pride and joy into an instrument of death. The trouble began when a fire broke out in the town. As the burgomaster, Hans felt duty-bound to help coordinate the emergency response. In his haste to assist his fellow townspeople, he made a fatal mistake. He forgot to roll up and secure his beard. As panic spread through the streets and smoke filled the air, Hans rushed to help, but fate had other plans. As he hurried down a flight of stairs, something went terribly wrong. His own foot landed on his trailing beard, and in an instant the pride of Braunau Inn became his downfall. Literally, Hans tumbled down the stairs, and in the process his neck snapped. The man who had led the town through 6 terms as burgomaster was killed by his own facial hair. The town was shocked by the bizarre nature of their beloved leader's death. But Hans Steininger's story didn't end there. Before his burial, his famous beard was carefully cut off and preserved. It became a treasured artifact, passed down through generations of his family like some sort of peculiar heirloom. Can you imagine growing up and having your father hand you a 4-foot-long disembodied beard saying, "Son, this is yours now. Take good care of it"? Eventually, in 1919, someone in the family finally decided enough was enough and donated the beard to the town. Today, more than 450 years after Hans Steininger's death, you can still see his legendary beard on display at the District Museum Herzogsburg in Braunau. The town also honors his memory with a large stone relief carving on the side of St. Stephen's Church, showing Hans with his infamous beard flowing down past his feet. The story of Hans Steininger serves as a bizarre reminder of how the very thing that makes us famous can sometimes be our undoing. His death might seem almost comical today, but it's also a testament to how even the most mundane things, like forgetting to tuck away your beard, can have fatal consequences. In Braunau am Inn, they've chosen to celebrate this unusual piece of their history, even offering tours led by Steininger reenactors wearing flowing fake beards, though presumably they're careful on the stairs. Today, visitors to Braunau can still see both the stone relief of Hans and his preserved beard, reminders of the man who quite literally died for his facial hair. It's probably the only case in history where a beard turned from fashion statement to murder weapon, making Hans Steininger's death one of the most bizarre endings in human history. It was April 4th, 2019 in Bolton, England. The bustling wedding venue was alive with the usual midday activities, and the kitchen hummed with the sounds of preparation. Darren Hickey, a 51-year-old wedding planner known for his larger-than-life personality and dedication to his craft, was making his routine rounds. Having survived a stroke 7 years earlier, he had rebuilt his life and career with remarkable determination. But on this ordinary spring afternoon, a simple taste test would turn into his last meal. At around noon that day, a chef at the venue offered Darren a fish cake to taste. It was a routine part of his job, sampling food for upcoming events. But this particular fish cake was fresh from the fryer and dangerously hot. When Darren took a bite, it immediately burned the back of his throat. The pain was severe enough that Darren decided to visit the urgent care ward at Chorley Hospital. The medical staff examined him, but could only see minor irritation. What they didn't realize, and couldn't see without specialized equipment, was that severe burning had occurred deep in his throat. They gave him some paracetamol and sent him home with instructions to return if things got worse. This is where things take a dark turn. You see, what happened to Darren is something pathologists usually only see in house fire victims. The intense heat had caused progressive swelling in his throat, similar to what happens when someone inhales superheated smoke. Dr. Patrick Waugh, who performed the post-mortem, explained that victims can appear perfectly fine and be talking normally, but the swelling continues to worsen over several hours. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Darren's partner Neil Parkinson heard strange noises coming from upstairs. He found Darren standing up, desperately choking and coughing. Neil tried to help by hitting his back, but Darren collapsed to the floor. Despite being rushed to Royal Bolton Hospital, Darren was pronounced dead just after midnight, less than 12 hours after eating the fish cake. The coroner's investigation revealed that the burns had caused extreme swelling in Darren's throat, making it impossible for him to breathe. His official cause of death was recorded as asphyxiation. Acting Senior Coroner Alan Walsh called it an immense tragedy and noted that while the fish cake was very small, it had catastrophic consequences. What makes this case particularly tragic is that Darren had already overcome significant challenges in his life. 7 years earlier, he had survived a severe stroke that left him with difficulty walking and speaking. He had worked hard to recover and was even given a Courage Award by the Stroke Association for his dedication to charity work. This case serves as a chilling reminder that death can come from the most unexpected sources. A simple taste test, something done countless times before, ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Darren Hickey's death stands as one of the strangest and most unfortunate cases in medical history, showing how even the most mundane actions can sometimes have fatal consequences. It was October 14, 2016, when Sarah Adams turned her Naperville, Illinois kitchen into a death trap with her so-called revolutionary dishwashing technique. At 31, this marketing manager was determined to prove she didn't need anyone after her messy divorce 6 months earlier. She'd invited 6 colleagues over for her first dinner party as a single woman, spending weeks bragging about her culinary genius and how she'd reinvented basic kitchen tasks. Sarah had developed an obsession with efficiency that bordered on dangerous. She believed dishwashers were too slow and inefficient, so she'd created what she called her speed washing system. Her modification involved completely removing the dishwasher door and replacing it with a homemade bungee cord contraption that she'd designed herself using YouTube tutorials and pure arrogance. The centerpiece of her insane invention was a custom-built knife carousel, a spinning mechanism she'd constructed inside the dishwasher that held all her kitchen knives with blades pointing in every direction. According to Sarah's twisted logic, this would provide maximum cleaning coverage, as the knives spun freely during the wash cycle. At 7:45 p.m., with her guests already gathered around the dining table, Sarah informed them that dinner would be delayed. She insisted on showcasing what she called her speed wash technique, a cleaning method she believed would eventually make her a fortune, once she got around to filing the patent paperwork. Her horrified colleagues watched as Sarah explained her method. Start the dishwasher cycle, then manually spin the knife carousel, while reaching inside to guide the cleaning process by hand. She claimed that machines lacked intelligence and needed human oversight to function properly. Despite her guests practically begging her to stop, Sarah was determined to prove her system's superiority. She started the cycle and immediately plunged both hands into the spinning, water-filled dishwasher. The scalding water mixed with high-pressure jets created a chaotic environment. But Sarah pressed on. The knife carousel began spinning at dangerous speeds, flinging sharp blades in every direction like a medieval torture device. Any rational person would have backed away, but Sarah leaned her entire upper body into the dishwasher to demonstrate what she called proper form. Multiple knives struck her simultaneously as the spinning mechanism went completely out of control. A paring knife sliced across her forearm, a steak knife grazed her shoulder, but the fatal blow came from her prized 10-inch chef's knife. The blade flew directly into her chest with tremendous force, piercing both her heart and lungs. Sarah collapsed forward into the dishwasher, her body becoming tangled in the bungee cord system she'd created. The continuing wash cycle and spinning knives caused additional devastating injuries as her life drained away in the soapy, blood-tinged water. Her guests, stunned into silence by the horrific scene, finally snapped into action and called 911. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes but found Sarah's body grotesquely twisted in her own contraption. The dishwasher was still running, continuing to spray water and spin knives around her lifeless form. It took emergency responders nearly 20 minutes to safely shut down her deadly invention and extract her body from the mechanical nightmare she'd created.